All right, let's jump right into today's explainer. We are looking at the domino effect of suspicion. Today we're unpacking an absolutely profound psychological framework derived from the Quran by author Ali Mohammed Al-Shurafa. We're going to explore how the invisible, completely silent thoughts of a single person can literally collapse an entire society. It's a really deep dive into human nature, cognitive bias, and just the immense, frankly terrifying power of our own silent assumptions.
Okay, let's dive into this with a question I want you to keep firmly in the back of your mind throughout this entire explainer. How many relationships are destroyed by a single illusion? It's a heavy thought, right? You know, we often think of conflicts as starting with some massive, blowout argument or a terrible action. But the source text we're analyzing today argues something much more subtle, and honestly, a lot more urgent. It suggests that the deepest fractures in our lives don't actually start with a scream. They start with a whisper, an illusion, a completely silent assumption that we just allow to take root. The author calls this specific illusion negative suspicion, or in Arabic, su' al-zan. And the text defines this not just as a harmless passing thought. No, it's a premature, entirely negative judgment made about someone without a single shred of concrete evidence. The author beautifully, yet kind of chillingly, describes this as a silent, invisible verdict passed in the closed room of the soul. Think about that. You're essentially putting someone on trial, acting as the judge and the jury, and convicting them entirely in your own mind, completely denying them the fundamental human right to defend themselves. It's literally an internal injustice long before it ever becomes an external one.
Now, what's really interesting about this next point is the stark, absolutely vital binary the author creates. Because right now you might be thinking, well, hang on, shouldn't I be careful? Shouldn't I protect myself? Absolutely. And the text clearly distinguishes between realistic caution and negative suspicion. Realistic caution is based on practical reality, right? It's grounded in actual evidence, clear actions, and tangible behaviors. If someone shows you who they are through their actions, you protect yourself. That's just logical. But negative suspicion? That is entirely based on illusions, doubts, and paranoia. The author warns that when we rely on that paranoia, we aren't protecting ourselves at all. Actually, we are just enslaving ourselves to our own illusions.
The text highlights a specific passage from Surah Al-Hujurat to map out the exact psychological descent that happens when we let that paranoia win. It's a very clear three-step chain reaction. Step 1, suspicion. You make an assumption without proof. But, our brains hate unresolved loops, right? So you naturally move to step 2, spying. You start secretly searching for literally anything to confirm the illusion you've already decided is true. And once you think you've found it, or honestly, even if you just imagine you did, you hit step 3, gossip. The backbiting begins and the poison just spreads into society. One bad thought literally triggers a total cascade of moral failures. And this internal psychological descent, man, it has brutal, real-world devastation. The text is very clear that we aren't just talking about abstract spiritual concepts here. There are highly tangible casualties of suspicion. We are talking about broken homes, bitter divorces sparked by a totally unfounded doubt, severed lifelong friendships just because one person assumed the worst about the other's intentions, shattered business partnerships built on years and years of hard work, destroyed overnight by a paranoid whisper. That closed room of the soul eventually breaks its doors down and just wrecks the physical world. To stop this devastation, the text presents what is essentially the ultimate psychological intervention. Take a listen to this incredibly powerful quote from Surah Al-Hujurat, verse 6. O you who have believed, if there comes to you a disobedient one with information, investigate, lest you harm a people out of ignorance. The framework here is demanding a full stop. It's like a massive, flashing stop sign designed by the Quran to halt that domino effect before it even has a chance to start tumbling. Investigate. Seek proof. Do not let ignorance guide your actions. And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate contrast presented in the text. On one side, we have what's called the method of the Quran, which is entirely rooted in verification, deep investigation, and seeking true knowledge, or ilm. It demands absolute, undeniable certainty. On the flip side is the method of Satan, which thrives entirely on haste, rushing to premature judgments, and relying on illusion, or wam. Evil, at least in this framework, doesn't need facts at all. It literally only needs your willingness to guess and assume the worst. Because of this, the author argues that the true foundation of justice lies in strict human accountability. This framework demands that we keep our minds perfectly neutral and our hearts totally pure until undeniable, concrete evidence is presented to us. We are accountable for every single judgment, every spoken word, and every accusation that we build on an assumption instead of a fact. If you haven't seen the proof, well, you don't have the right to pass the verdict.
It is really that simple, and yet, as we all know, incredibly difficult to practice in real life.
Historically, failing to practice this has led to massive, disastrous societal shifts. The text points to Surah Al-An'am, verse 116, which states, "They follow not except assumption, and they are not but falsifying." The author points out that relying on assumptions, rather than doing the genuinely hard work of rigorous investigation, has historically caused entire groups of people to stray completely from the truth. When we abandon evidence, we become incredibly vulnerable to following deceivers and charlatans who just manipulate our unverified doubts.
So the crucial point here is that this framework doesn't just stop at how we treat each other. It escalates the stakes to the absolute maximum. The author notes that the highest danger, the ultimate peak of this destructive trait, is suspecting God. This means harboring the belief that the Creator is unjust, unmerciful, or completely unaware of what is happening to his creation. Applying negative suspicion to the divine is presented as the total collapse of a person's spiritual foundation. The text backs this up with a very severe quote from Surah Al-Fath verse 6, highlighting the fate of the assumers about Allah, an evil assumption. The text explains that holding these negative suspicions about God doesn't just anger the divine. Psychologically speaking, it leads a person into a relentless state of permanent anxiety. They end up living in a state of constant objection to their reality, totally disconnected from peace and headed straight for spiritual ruin, simply because they fundamentally distrust the architect of their universe.
But look, it's not all doom and gloom. There is a way out. The text highlights what it calls the preventive cure. The absolute beauty of this entire Quranic psychological framework is that it is totally proactive, not reactive. It is perfectly designed to prevent the crime before it happens, rather than just trying to treat the wounds after the damage is already done. It acts as this incredible psychological safety net. By training the mind to demand evidence and just flat out reject assumptions, it stops hostility right there at the thought level, long before it ever has the chance to manifest into a physical conflict.
Which brings us to this incredibly profound quote from the author that perfectly summarizes the core thesis of this entire explainer. Societies are not built by laws alone, but by mutual trust. Think about it. You can have the most robust legal system in the world, the strictest police force, and the absolute tightest regulations. But laws absolutely cannot hold together a society whose citizens have hearts filled with suspicion about one another. If trust is gone, the whole society is just hollowed out from the inside. And that leaves us with a final, really deeply personal reflection based on this remarkable text. I want you to really think about this as we wrap up today. If you look into the closed room of your mind right now, how many innocent people have you convicted without a trial? Seriously, how many assumptions are you carrying around today that are based on an illusion rather than a hard fact? It's a pretty powerful framework to evaluate the true state of our hearts and our minds. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning those assumptions, and I'll catch you on the next one.
مؤسسة رسالة السلام العالمية، رسالة إنسانية لعالم أكثر سلاماً.